Talk Radio. Your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome everyone to Liberty Talk Radio. Today we have a special guest. His name is Mr. Jorge Gutierrez, and he heads the Business and Management Operations Consulting Group. He is a tested leader with a passion for leadership and professional growth, and do we need that today in today's economy? The focus today will be on organizational alignment through results-based leadership and leadership development. The group helps individuals and organizations drive growth, accomplished by helping people achieve their goals. George, welcome to Liberty Talk Radio.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. Anything with the name Liberty on it's got my full attention.
Oh, great. We're on the same page. Well, today you said you wanted to speak about leadership. You know, that's a term that even our politicians, I hate to dirty the conversation by using the word politician, but our politicians use the word leadership incessantly, and everyone has a different definition, a different meaning, and sort of a different ideology when it comes to that word. Could you help define it for us?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and I love the way that the show is open, because it talks about there's no BS here. It's nothing but the facts. Right. Okay, so there's always an ongoing discussion about leadership and what people think leadership is. Now, many people believe that it's a science. Other people believe that it's an art. You know, I believe that it's a combination of both. Okay. But at the end of the day, you know, I like to keep things simple. So a real simple responsibility, you know, that we could actually hope that these politicians will learn, is that leadership, if you want to express it as a mathematical formula, then leadership equals responsibility. So that, to me, begins with a very simple definition that if we can agree, you know, that leadership is responsibility, then I think we can move to the other parts of it that I find amazing, because it doesn't matter who you ask, they come up with a different response.
Right. Well, don't most people sort of want to look up to people who have relatively responsible positions as being a leader, and very few people say, you know, I could be the leader. I mean, everyone could be the leader. We don't have to wait for someone to be elected to an office or attain a particular position in an organization to be the leader. Anyone can really fill that role. Or am I misguided in that regard?
No, I don't think you're misguided, but I think that's where the complication really begins, because leadership, in the definition that we just discussed, it doesn't include position. You can be given any position. So then the question is, does that position requires any responsibility, you know, from you? Now, what type of responsibility is it that we're looking for as we try to attempt to understand leadership? So leadership is about influencing people. Leadership is about people. So there's different forms of leadership. You know, you have autocratic type leadership, which is sort of in your face, do what I say, not necessarily what I do. And if you don't do what I say because of the position that I hold on this company, then there's going to be a consequence to you that could be adverse, because I'll just fire you. Okay. So those types of leaders are not looked upon or admired by anyone, because they're basically feared, and they use their power, you know, as a source of making people do what they otherwise would not do. Right. Where if you think of it in terms of influencing and in terms of serving, then leadership is about getting people to do what they otherwise would not normally be able to do, because they may not believe in themselves, or because they may believe that they lack the skills or that the goals are too high. So a leader that comes in and motivates these people, not in a negative way, but in a positive way, by communicating, you know, in an effective way, in an influential way, and by demonstrating that they too, the leader himself, can actually perform these things. So when you begin to lead by example, and by modeling the right behaviors, then we begin to see a people that will look up to that type of expert power, if you do.
Yeah. Now, isn't that definition sort of diluted or bastardized, I guess is the best word for it, when we talk about leaders of certain countries who are despots, people who torture their own people, who starve their own people, and then we refer to them as the leader of that country. We've seen this. Stalin, for example, Hitler, they were the leaders of their country. Mussolini, a leader of their country. But yet they weren't leaders in the same context that you're speaking about. They forced themselves into that role and used the element of fear to maintain that position. But yet it seems that the hierarchy in other countries say the leader of Germany is Hitler. And that's a misnomer, is it not?
Well, no, I mean, they're right by saying who the leader of the organization is or who the leader of the country is. So just because you're the leader of a country doesn't make you a good leader. It just makes you, a leader that's going to do whatever he or she is going to do. I mean, recently we had a discussion about what happened with Wells Fargo, to where some of their practices by a bunch of different employees when it came to sales, resulted in employees opening accounts for a bunch of their clients without any authorization. Well, the leader of the organization, when he was pressed under congressional questioning about these type of practices, ended up shifting blame and saying, well, what we did is we fired about 5,400 of our employees. And by the way, I'll give up a little bit of, my compensation, and I'll do this and I'll do that. So, if you talked about Hitler, yeah, he was definitely a leader. However, he used charisma. He was a charismatic speaker, to influence people, right, to do what otherwise they would not do. So his platform, of desegregation, of racial, consumption of what he considered, not the right type of class, was not what we today have come to embrace in a multicultural society, and we stand against that. But he did have success because he was able to communicate, with those that were following him in such a way they took him at his word and they did what he wanted to be done. So not all leaders are good leaders, and we're seeing that in not only in business but in politics. And it depends on what the ideology is and what your value system is. So I think part of what's important to understand here is the culture and the values, a set of core values that any either organization or an individual has that would define them as a good leader. And I find that very interesting because I try to explain that, again, going back to simplicity. And one way of measuring whether or not other people are in alignment with ourselves is by using our own personal value system, okay? And I look at that simply as the rules of the road. So if I'm trying to do business with an organization, but their value system are in conflict with my value system because of ethics, legality, or morality, then that's somebody, or that is an entity that I don't want to do business with.
Yeah. Well, then the examples that we have of people that we call leaders can in fact taint the definition of a truly good leader, because we can throw in Pol Pot and people like Mao Tse-tung, all of whom were leaders, but very, very, very detrimental to society in itself. And you think some of that sometimes carries over into the corporation, into the organization, where people feel like, well, you really have to be a little bit of tough and mean and, make those hard decisions regardless of how people feel, no matter how it affects them whatsoever. Doesn't it make a job as a leader in industry even more difficult?
Well, it makes it very difficult, and so now we're using huge examples of ideology. So Mao Zedong, Stalin, even Karl Marx, Hitler, Mussolini, and some of those folks, their ideology was founded on a good idea of social, ecumenical well-being for the masses. But in the application of that particular ideology, they moved to deny the opportunities of expression, the opportunities of, just enterprise, the opportunities of religion, etc., to their society, because their ideology replaced all those other belief systems. And so they believed that the social order will be based on the common good. Well, we can see what happened to the Soviet Union after 75 years of, Marxism and Leninism. They were destroyed. We can see some of the other examples as well. So yes, if we are going to lead using a narrow ideology, of a point of view that we are not going to budge from, then there's no leadership growth. There's no growth in that. So when you look at our society, and I'm glad we're talking about this, because a lot of people, don't want to talk about leadership in the political sense. A lot of people don't want to talk about religion, in the belief system type of sense, because they look at these topics as controversial. Well, let's just not go there because, we're going to make enemies. Real leaders have enough strength of character to talk about these things and to put them out there, in the public forum in a way that is not offensive, but in a way that is responsible, because you're right about what you said. Leadership, real leaders and true leaders, when tested, they do have to make tough decisions that are not always popular.
Right.
So just because they're not popular decisions does not mean that they're the wrong decisions, because a lot of times, in order for us to really see and embrace any types of change, we have to see it for ourselves. But it takes that one first step, to really go into different waters that may not be, appreciated by everybody else. I mean, if you look at our country right now, the numbers are pretty clear. Ideologically, we're pretty much split between the left and the right, the ultra left and the ultra right, and then there's something somewhere in the middle. Right. So I think culturally we're going to continue to struggle with that. But those types of decisions about leadership that affect our society, they have consequences, and those consequences are not often materialized overnight. It requires, when you shift directions of an organization or of a culture or of a country because of a decision that is made, sometimes it takes years to make that turn to begin to see some of the benefits of that hard decision that is made.
Yeah. Some people are considered born leaders, and I never understood what they meant by that. But instead of asking you that question or ask you to define that, could you give to me what are the most important attributes that make for effective leadership where people want to follow and respect the decisions that are being made for the corporation, let's say?
So let's just take that one, and I'll answer your question, but let's just take this born leaders concept. So this really, I think, is interesting, because there's one thing that is true. We are all born, okay? Every single one of us are all born. But every single one of us, irrespective of geography or life experiences, we have these internal desires that I call callings, these things that we develop a passion for, these things that we believe we can do really well. And some of them go into the mathematics, some of them become carpenters. So these are talents that we all have that are inherent to ourselves, when we are born. And then over time, as we develop skills and as we develop knowledge, then we become better at these things, on a daily basis. So to me, leadership is about understanding what your calling is. What is the one thing that you're called to do in life, an internal calling, if you would, that you feel so passionate about that you think about it all the times. So I remember when I was young and I was interacting or playing sports or whatever, or I was dealing with conflict or trying to solve problems, I would always say, you know what, if I was just in charge, I know how to fix that. So to me, problem solving became something that became clear. Now, it was in the application of solving that problem, and you talked about it a little bit earlier, was, as a young man, I was an in-your-face kind of guy. You know, if you weren't going to solve the problem, and if you weren't going to comply with what I was going to tell you, then I was going to karate kick you and make sure that you did it anyways. Okay. So because I didn't have the communication skills, because I didn't have the knowledge of the type of leadership to apply. So what are some of the attributes? I think some of the attributes that we can look at in leaders, and I call them both attributes and traits, but the traits or attributes that are displayed by good and effective leaders are integrity, you know, our good character, you know, our loyalty, are the kinds of things that when you behave, people can actually say, you know what, that guy was tough when I knew him. And yeah, he made me do some crazy things, but he knew what he was talking about. So I didn't like him a little bit at the time, but he taught me so much. I learned so much from him or from her, you know, that really made my life, you know, a different place to be. Or things like, you know what, as long as you go talk to that guy, he's never going to lie to you because he believes he's honest about everything, you know, word and in deed. He's always going to be truthful. Right. You know, he's always going to let you have it the way that it's supposed to be. He's not going to sugarcoat it. He's just going to tell you the truth. You know what? That guy's got good morals. He doesn't cheat on his wife or whatever. And if he ever did, he would admit it. And he would ask for forgiveness because he's not a perfect kind of guy, you know. Yeah. So I think those are the attributes that people are looking for to emulate. You know, and I'll give you an example that I hope it gets so freaking controversial that people will call me and bitch all they want to. You know, here's the behavior that we're seeing in the NFL today. We have people that are paid millions of dollars. These are young men that are being paid millions of dollars, and they choose to disrespect our nation. They choose to disrespect our veterans. They choose to disrespect the symbol of liberty that our flag represents. And instead of standing up and saluting, they bow in silent protest to that. You know, that is not a good example of good leadership. Right. That is an example of leadership, but it's modeling a behavior that is not in the least anything that we should be looking, you know, towards. And again, that's my opinion, but I'm just talking about ourselves in a way that is painful to me, because I just don't understand why people choose to act in that kind of way.
Yeah. So you're saying a leader can be tough, but people have to respect the decision that they're making and realize that although they're not taking the easy way out or the fun way out or taking the smooth path rather than the difficult path that would in fact produce the desired result, they can respect that, and eventually they become better for it, while the leader maintains his principle and is respected for it.
Yeah, so you know, as you study leadership, and as I do, I'm a student of leadership, what we learn is that we become our leaders. See, we become them. So those that are providing leadership to us, good or bad, we learn more by watching what they do than by what they say. So if we're not careful, you know, and develop ourselves intellectually and academically, you know, throughout life, then we're just going to repeat the same behaviors that we observe. Right. So here's something interesting. A leader can be tough, but he doesn't have to be callous.
Right, I agree.
And a leader can make tough decisions, but they don't have to be brutal in how they make those decisions with those people that, you know, he's working with. It's about how we communicate with one another. And loyalty doesn't mean that you shut your mouth and you don't tell your leader what you think. Okay, but loyalty is that there's open discourse and you can disagree with the decisions that are being studied before they are made. But once that decision is made, then loyalty works both ways. Right. So we get behind that decision if it were ours that we just made it. Yeah. And then once we get behind that decision, then that's where that loyalty really interacts, you know, up and down and even sideways, so that those decisions can be carried out, whether they're in policy decisions, whether they're in business decisions, or family decisions. I mean, a good example is, you know, my kids used to come to me and say, "Dad, can I have this and that and the other?" And then I would say, "Sure, you can have it. Well, mostly because I just wanted them to leave me alone because I was busy, right? So then my wife would come back and she said, well, I told them they couldn't have it. So, I learned my lesson. So when they came back and I said, well, did you ask your mother? And what did she say? She said, no. I said, well, then the answer is no. So we learned to work together, throughout those tender years. And now we have 2 grown children who are, a delight to be around, respectful, and are leading their own productive lives. It doesn't mean that they agree, with what I do as a leader. So, for example, as a leader of my family, I vote a certain way. Yeah. Well, my son didn't agree with the way that I was going, so he wanted to vote a different kind of way. So it's great for me to understand that he did that, and it's also great for him to understand that he can share it with me without, having any kind of penalty attached to it. Yeah. Because, my job was to train him. My job was to teach him. But then him as a young leader, his job is to choose.
Yeah. Well, leaders don't enable, but they do seek honest and open input from the people that are in their group so that they can all be on the same page and move forward and learn from one another. And it takes guts for a leader to do that. And it takes guts for me to say this, but we're out of time. But so I'd like to give you the next 30 minutes or a minute or so just to wrap things up, George. And I'm sorry I had not mentioned that we had an open line. We had a telephone number, but I guess we didn't have much time to take any calls. So I think on our next series, we will mention the fact that we have a telephone and that people can call in and ask questions. But I'd like for you to wrap up things up now in the next 30 seconds or so.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I think when we talk about leadership, it's just like talking about any other skills or any other things that, anyone can be called to do. Yeah. The trick about deciding whether or not you're going to be a leader or be someone that bears responsibility in any endeavor in life is to know whether you have the passion to do that, whether you really stay awake at night smiling about solving problems for other people and coming up with solutions, and helping people grow in whatever they do. So leadership is learned. We are born with certain passions and certain likes and certain inclinations, but leadership is something that just scientifically we can learn over time and become very good at it. So I appreciate the conversation. Let's continue it. There's much to talk about this, especially if we talk about the differences between leadership and between management, which kind of go hand in hand. And if anybody's interested in giving me a call, I'll be glad to take your call at 888-720-6996, or you can go to my website at www.bmocgroup.com. Again, thank you for the opportunity to spend time with Liberty Radio and your listeners today.
Well, thank you so much for being on our show. We look forward to our next segment on leadership development. And I guess next time we'll talk a little bit about management and how leadership and management meld in. We'd like to thank everyone for their attention and for tuning in. You can further the cause of liberty, by the way, by recommending this program to your friends and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.